Hi, I'm John Byrne with Poets and Quants. I'm back here again at the Kelley School of Business on the campus of Indiana University. Beautiful sunny day here today. We are here for the second session in our sort of extravaganza on the MBA online experience. And in this session, we're going to talk to two students and a professor at Kelley Direct about what the nitty-gritty, day-to-day, week-to-week experience is like in an online MBA program. To my immediate left, we have Brooke Spenser, who is a manager in the corporate strategy department at Walmart.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And next to Brooke, we have Trip Holt, who is a technical business leader at Allegion. Allegion. Okay, there we go. And both our students are actually graduating this year, so this is the tail end of the program for them. So they have a really good perspective on what it was like to start, to go through the program, to engage in some of the immersions, and to finish up, I hope. And then we have a professor who looks as young as a student, who teaches corporate strategy, Will Gagan. Welcome.
Thank you, John.
So we really want to talk at first, I think, maybe I want to get into your thinking about getting an online MBA first. Like, how did you know you wanted to do an online program instead of a more traditional residential program, and how did you come to Kelley? Brooke?
So for me, I knew I wanted to get an MBA for my career and for progression. And then when I looked at my current job that I had when I applied, I loved the job. I felt like it was an awesome development opportunity. And I had a boss and company that was supportive of doing some part-time MBA work. So for me, it wasn't worth sacrificing my progression on the job to go to a full-time program. So I knew it had to be something part-time. And I started looking around at some of the part-time options in my geographic area, which at the time was really limited. So I said, it's got to be online. And so from there, I started looking at some of the top programs and decided Kelley was a choice for me.
And your undergraduate degree is in what?
It's in finance and HR.
Okay. And so you did have a business background undergraduate?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And when you first started looking, you were based where?
In Oklahoma City.
Okay, very good. Trip, how about you?
Well, my story is a little bit different than Brooke's. I did my undergraduate in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in mechatronics, so mixing mechanical with electronics and software. I had no desire to go back and get an MBA. I already had a master's. Why would I want a second one? I had a mentor at the time that I was talking to about opportunities moving around the firm. He really recommended that I think hard about it, and I said, well, what is it about the MBA? He's like, well, it's everything you're going to learn, everything that you can apply, and oh, by the way, everyone on my team has their MBA. So that really concreted for me the idea that I needed to do it. That said, I had this, I think there was a stigma associated with online MBAs, and I looked hard about, should I quit or, take a leave of absence for 2 years and go do a Ivy League MBA. Costs were prohibitive for my situation. I have a wife and 2 children at home, and so started looking at what are my options to maintain my job. I love where I'm at. I love what we're doing. I feel like our organization is growing and we have a lot of potential. So I wanted to stay, which really left me with the options of either nights and weekends programs or doing it online. So thinking back and forth about what the options were, I really settled on the online route when I started thinking about all of the driving that it would take to get to and from the online MBA. 2 kids at home, right? Leave work at 5, get to a campus at 5:45, maybe have class 6 to 8, you get home at 9, and your day is. So the thought was, if I can not have to take on any additional drive time and focus that additional time, right, 3 to 4 hours a week on studying, how much more effective will that let me be a father and a husband? So that's really the decision around why I decided around the online MBA program.
And the Kelley choice for you?
There was a lot of options. I actually didn't want to stick with an Indiana school, being in Indiana. I wanted to broaden the thought process. I was with other people. I worked with other people that have gone to Kelley, and they all have amazing stories and only heard good things about it, but I also wanted to bring in a diverse thought process. And really what drove the Kelley decision was looking at the rankings, looking at what other students were saying about other programs, and Kelley just looked like the top-notch opportunity with the most flexibility.
Right. So the program typically begins with an on-campus visit.
Yeah.
Connect Week. Did both of you start the program that way?
Yes.
So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so the first week of Kelley Connect is amazing. They bring in some of the in my opinion, the best lecturers. I'm sure that there are others who are amazing.
So Will
as
had to
well,
be
but-
included in that group, right?
Yeah. So surprisingly, I don't know if I don't think we
I
had
was
Will.
in
No,
Kelley when
no,
you
no.
started Trip, actually.
Yes, see, he would have been if he had been part of Kelley. But they essentially start with a day and a half of lectures, and we're all coming in fresh. Most of us didn't have a undergraduate in business, and so teaching the basics of whatever it is that we were going to need for the case, and really towards the end of day one and going into day two, they start introducing what the case was. For us, it was a local wing shop. I think we actually both had the same.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the same case. Introducing that, and we started to immediately see how the lessons that we were being taught in the lectures applied to what we were being asked to do. I think that really set up the 2-year experience that we've had of taking classes and being able to implement it immediately in the work that we're doing, which I think is a major advantage that we have over the option of quitting your job and doing an in-residence program.
Yeah.
And how closely did you get to know some of your classmates in that first week?
Oh, amazingly close. Some of the best relationships that I have found, had throughout the program were in the first week, and then again the second week. You know, the other thing that has driven close friendships is having the same people in the same classes, and you find who you work well with, and you then, as you take continual classes with them, you reach out early and you say, hey, let's group up, right? And, we know we work well together. But the best part about that is with having such a diverse student population, you're really able to find people across different industries, right? Across the globe. Really, I think we had a student from New Zealand who was part of our Kelley Connect Week.
Wow.
And so really driving some of that cross-pollination of ideas and segments.
And your live case involved what kind of challenge?
So the case was centered around a small restaurant here in Bloomington, and some of the challenges were that they wanted to expand, they wanted to offer more options to students, but they weren't sure how to do it with their current space limitations. So we did a lot of work around making their operations efficient in the shop. My team recommended reducing the number of items on their menu so they could offer quicker turnaround on order time, and offering a delivery service on campus, which students love. So we made a lot of recommendations around efficiencies, and then combing through their financials. By the way, they were an open book to us. They gave us everything we would need to be a real consultant to them, from financials to getting to spend time with their owners. They even let us into the shop to observe how the operations work behind the scenes.
Did you get a free meal?
Oh, plenty, trust
Okay.
me. I ate more wings that week than anyone ever should. But one afternoon we spent in the back in the grill line, seeing how the guys grill the different meats and get them through the process, and we could observe firsthand where the inefficiencies were and ask them and get firsthand point of views.
Wow. And then you presented to the owner, right?
Yes.
And you presented as a team because you worked on this problem through teams, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Great experience.
Great.
So, Will, what's it like to teach in a virtual classroom compared to a real classroom for you as a faculty member?
I love it. So the virtual nature of it, you can enable close connections even when it is online. So for my classes, usually I have a pre-recorded element where I will lecture, so that anything that we do in a live context is meaningful and allows for the application and engagement of the topic for the students rather than in some type of a passive manner. So technology has really evolved over the last 5 or 10 years, and the platform we currently use, Zoom, allows me to use things like polls, like breakout rooms, to really allow the students to get to know each other and then to work and share some of their insights. So, for example, Brooke and Trip have been in one of my classes, and certain topics.
You tell me you're a tough grader.
Well, I like to challenge them so that they can get to their full potential, I guess. So as we talk about the same level of rigor with the residential
Right.
MBA, so yeah, it's not particularly easy, but as Tripp was talking about this morning, he was illustrating that if you put in a certain amount of hard work, then the payoff is definitely there for sure. So it's been a hugely enjoyable experience for me. It's the cohort that I love teaching to, because they all come in with amazing experiences and skills that I can just create a platform and facilitate the discussion rather than lecture to, I guess.
Right. And you flip your classrooms, as you pointed out, right? So your lectures are videotaped in advance of the live class.
Yep.
What do you get into the concepts of strategic concepts first
Yeah.
there?
So, for example, in one of my classes, my strategic management class, each of 10 different units will have a series of pre-recorded videos, usually bite-sized videos that are in a playlist, so anything between 3 to 5 minutes. You'll watch a series of those videos, and then you will carry out an application task for your company. So, for example, Brooke would have carried it out for Walmart, and then approximately 2 to 3 application tasks after watching the video and reading the textbook, and then I will grade that and try and turn it around as quickly as possible. Then in the live class, Brooke will get to share some of those insights on Walmart, and also will use a case study as the central platform for discussion as well. So,
I'm often told by professors who have taught in a real classroom
Yep.
compared to a virtual classroom, that when they go online, it actually makes them a better teacher. And that's because they often have to line up what they teach with what their expected outcomes for the class should be. And it's actually an even more rigorous process for a professor to connect the material to what the outcomes need to be. Is that true?
yeah, I think a lot of work goes into setting up the class in advance, whether it's trying to create discussion topics in breakout rooms, or whether it's trying to make it as interesting and as pedagogically diverse as possible to make sure that people like Tripp and Brooke have that close connection through the exploration of the topic at hand. So yeah, I'm biased, but I would slightly agree with you there, John. It is tougher to teach potentially in an online platform, but the rewards are greater when you start to see the payoffs, for sure, in my experience.
And what about the transition for the student? Okay, you both did your undergrad and you did a master's in a regular classroom. How difficult was the transition to learn in a virtual setting for the two of you?
For me, it wasn't too far of a stretch, because where I work at Walmart, it's a global business, and we spend a
Yeah.
lot of our time on video calls. We do a lot of presentations over video, so you have to be adept at that already. So for me, taking classroom information and learning from the professor and having group discussions over video chat was not a stretch at all. Actually really comfortable. I enjoy it. I think it makes you purposeful in your communication. You have to, you can't sit there and be distracted. You have to be present. You have to be typing in a chat box. You have to be voicing up when the discussion feels right for you. So I think it may make you more engaged too, because you can't slack off and just listen in the background.
Right.
I'll definitely agree with all of that. Coming from the corporate world, we're very versed in video conferencing. Being able to read someone's facial features, right? Only 30% of communication is the words people are actually saying.
Right.
The rest are the nonverbals. One thing that Will actually does that I thought was a great addition to the class is, while he doesn't mandate that you have your video camera on, he highly recommends that you have your video camera on. And really what you see is a herd mentality where the first, people will show up to class and all their video cameras are off, and Will say, all right, guys, turn your video cameras on, and 3 will do it, and then 5 will do it, and then you have 35 people with their video cameras on, which really helps, especially when you're talking about a breakout session. And the way that Will structures his class is all of the material that you need to be able to digest and think about on your own, you can do that on your own. You don't have to show up to a lecture and listen to a teacher talk and then be told to go implement something immediately. Say, do your reading, listen to your lectures, digest, and then when you come, we're going to figure out how to apply this and work with your peer members to apply. And I think it really makes that time that essentially, if we relate it back to corporate America, it's the brainstorming session. It makes that much more efficient versus going out and doing your market research and making sure that you understand your segments and your SWOT analysis, right? And that's all homework that has to be done in the corporate world. When you show up to get work done in a group, you need to be efficient and motivated, and I think that's exactly what this learning platform allows.
So describe for me maybe one of your first courses. What topic did you explore, and how did it play out with the weekly live sessions?
So one of my first classes was your basic economics class. It's part of the core curriculum. And it had been several years since I've had it, so I was a little rusty on some of the concepts. And so we would meet for class once a week, and the professor and everyone would dial in. And as Tripp said, he'd given us some pre-work ahead of time, some assignments, some practice problems, and then during the live session, we would have a discussion. We would work through some problems together. You'd get a chance to interact with your classmates and the professor. And then offline, you could meet. We had group projects that we did together, so you and your group would set up times to meet together and work through some of the practice problems.
And you meet on Zoom.
We would meet on Zoom, yes.
Okay.
So without the professor, just as a group of students, we would meet. And then often we would, have phone calls or text messages in between to get some questions answered, and then deliver together group work to the professor.
And I remember you telling me at breakfast that diversity in the class was an important element for you.
Huge.
So when you're in that teen group where you're preparing for class assignments, where were your fellow students from?
All over the place.
Yeah.
So I have met the most diverse group of students, and I love it. And I think people's backgrounds bring such a richness to the program. Like in my Kelley Connect week, I was in with someone who was a graphic artist, and someone who was a dentist, and someone who was an ex-military. And like, those are not people I get to work with every day. So
A
it was,
dentist?
Yeah, that was a fun one.
In between root canals, I'm going to take my virtual lessons.
Well, if you're a dentist though and you own a practice, you might
Yeah.
need some business
No,
knowledge,
absolutely.
right? So I appreciate that. And in like my small groups, when I reach out to people to be in a small group to work with, I really try to reach to people who are different than me. I don't want somebody who has an undergrad business degree.
Yeah.
I want someone who's from a different life than me, so they bring a different perspective.
Great point.
Yeah, absolutely. Having that diversity of groups is incredibly helpful, because when it doesn't matter if you're doing a marketing assignment, you need to figure out how to take an idea all the way through implementation and how you're going to bring it to market. Having someone with a finance background is going to be much more beneficial to our team than someone who has just taken a finance class. Now, granted, I'm sure that we're all experts in finance after one finance class, or finance, I guess is how we say it in business school. But having that diversity is huge. I'd say that one of the negatives of having diversity is time zones. And
Sure.
we just need to be cognizant that people on the West Coast get off of work at 5, just like people on the East Coast do. But 5 for them is not 5 for us, right? So being okay with doing late night sessions for some, or even I've had teams that wanted to meet super early in the morning because we had people over in Europe. And that's just something that we deal with, and we try and spread the pain around, right? Dealing,
And that's the real world today.
It's
Yeah.
real world,
Yeah.
right? If I have to be on a phone call at 7 p.m. with, India, right? I'm going to ask them to be on the phone call with me at 7 p.m. their time at some other time. And that's just I think the global economy that we live in today.
Exactly. What did you find the most difficult about doing the program so far? Was it balancing your professional life with your academic life, and in your case, you have 2 kids and a wife? Was it balancing your responsibilities at Walmart with this? What was the most difficult thing for you, both of you?
Well, I don't want to speak for Brooke, but
Yes.
I believe that we both have jobs that require significantly more than 40 hours a week already. We're here because we want to improve ourselves. We want to continue to grow, and that means that we already put in extra effort with the jobs that we have. For me personally, it definitely has been the time commitment. There are some classes that will, require 10 to 12 hours of work a week, and there's other classes that require, 4 to 5, and it really just depends on what you're learning, what your background in, and how easily you're able to absorb the information and be able to use it.
What about Will's strategic management class? How much work
Throw
does he
me
make
under
you
the bus,
do?
John. Harsh.
Am I going to be nice to Will or tell him the truth?
No, I'm going to remind Tripp what he said. You get what you put
Yeah.
into it, right? So you put in more, you get more, right?
That's absolutely true. I think really of almost every class that we've taken, the more that you can relate it to what your personal situation is, what your work situation is, what your family situation is, and be able to apply it immediately is not only going to help you retain the information, but actually give you the opportunity to practice the information. And with practice comes failure. And sometimes you read or hear or talk about something in a class, and then you bring it out in your dealing with my wife, talking to my wife differently. Let me tell you, I always get that perfect. Or
Not from my class.
That's a side
not
benefit
from Will's.
of the program then, huh?
But the reality is that sometimes we're going to do something and we didn't quite get it right. It could be in how we did it, it could be in
Sure.
what we did, but having the opportunity to learn about something, think about it, figure out how do you apply it to yourself, and then actually go practice it, gives you that immediate feedback so you can get corrections. And if there needs to be a conversation after the fact with the professor, every single professor has been more than willing to meet outside of normal class hours and just say, hey, I had something come up, can we hop on Zoom for 5 minutes sometime this week? I'll be available whenever you are, and they can, right, almost always make that happen.
Right. So how many hours?
For
prep?
Will, you're really going to push
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
For Will, I think almost every module had 1 or 2 studies, right? I'm thinking back to the eyeglasses. Warby Parker, thank you.
Warby Parker case.
And, reality is to read through the case only takes 30 minutes or so. To find 30 minutes of quiet time that you can actually focus on the case and think about it, so let's just call that an hour. Plus there is any additional material that we need, an hour maybe of digesting the lectures. It may be 3 5-minute lectures, but if you actually really think about how do I apply this to myself, the prep material I think was typically 2 to 3 hours a week, and then you have an hour, hour and a half of lectures, so we're at 4. And then how do you actually go take this and move forward with it, I think is the next piece. And with Will's, we didn't have a huge amount of teamwork outside of the class. So I think Will's was probably on the easier end of maybe that 5 hours. But I think what really made Will's class most successful is he was very transparent. You knew what was expected of you. So as long as you did what was expected of you, it was easy, versus some other classes who they'll release the content week by week and you don't know what's coming up. And that can, of course, throw a wrench in your plans just because you don't know how to effectively manage your time.
And I
Right.
think every class is different. Some
Yeah.
have discussion forums that take a
Right.
little bit more time to engage in an online discussion. Some have group projects, some have papers that you need to do. So definitely depends on the class. I think it also depends on your professional background of what class will take you a lot of time and what won't. So when I took the basic finance course, I'd been in finance for 6 years, and so I just did the formulas and moved on. It didn't take a lot of background studying time. But then when I took a class that was harder for me, like organizational design that I'd never been exposed to, that took a lot of time for me to study and remember, and took a lot of notes and watched the videos 2 to 3 times to really feel like I had a good understanding.
But it's not easy peasy.
There's nothing easy about it.
Wow.
I mean, it's a rigorous education.
It is.
It's not an MBA light.
It's not.
No, it's the same content.
Right, exactly. Now, there are a lot of features to the Kelley Direct program. One of them is the accessibility of coaching. And I wonder if either of you took advantage of that.
So I didn't do you mean the career coaching,
Yeah.
right? So I didn't do the career coaching in the formal sense. Like Kelley assigned you a career coach that you had
Right.
the opportunity to reach out to. And I didn't do it that way because at the time I didn't want to move careers. But I did leverage the professors as mentors. And so once I found the professors who were in the fields or had worked in the fields that I wanted to work in,
Right.
I set up time with them. And I met one-on-one with them to learn about their careers and their progression and what they could tell me about industry that would help me then enter industry. So I did it more on an informal basis.
Sure. And you found the professors accessible, open,
Oh, extremely.
welcoming.
They were really accessible. It really surprised me. Some of the professors would give out their mobile cell phone numbers and say, just text me when you want to talk. Or they
Really?
Will's calendar's open. We can book meetings with him anytime. Like,
Oh, Will.
They're
No, not my
great.
cell phone number, but my
Yeah, so they made themselves accessible and open and also really flexible on time to meet with us because, we have to meet outside of working hours, which happens to eat into their personal time, but they were always very willing.
How about you?
I can think of maybe only 1 or 2 teachers who haven't given out their personal cell phone numbers.
Yeah.
I did take the formal career counseling services. Now, I don't think I got out of it what many people would get out of it. Many people go in with a very detailed or very strong idea of what they're wanting to get out of it, and they can come out successful. I was in a role that I really loved what I was doing. I loved what we as a firm were doing. I liked where I was going as well as where we were going, and knew that there was something more, but didn't know what more was. And so when I went in and handed them my resume and said, "Tell me what you think," and it looks like a resume. What do you want me to tell you? That what I got out of it most was the realization that I needed to figure out what I wanted to be able to get the feedback that they are so gifted in giving. So. Background of engineering, if I'm wanting to move to the business side, that's a very specific goal. We can take a look at my resume and tweak what I've done in the past for how I can help do that versus if I want to stay on the engineering side or maybe move firms, right? Those are two very different goals with two very different outcomes.
Right.
So what I got most out of that was really identifying what I wanted, and I didn't want to have two different resumes at that point. I made a strategic decision for myself of where I thought I wanted to go, and they were able to help me through that.
Great. So Will, how do you reach out to students outside the classroom? Do you actually have office hours in the online environment?
So I started with office hours, and ironically, no one was showing up.
Yeah,
so
that often happens.
Yeah,
right?
so I've just opened up my Outlook calendar, and I've segmented times where I'll make sure that I'm available pretty much for an hour or two every day. So I have a rule of thumb that I'll always make time within 24 hours. I think the expectancy within the student body of Kelley Direct is that they're very busy people. If they can make 15 minutes, then I should be able to make 15 minutes. The way in which I've connected with students on a deeper level, whether it's through sitting in on some of their breakout groups in the Zoom session, the introductory meeting is very, very important, and also the Kelley Connect weeks. So I've been heavily involved in 2 Kelley Connect weeks, and similar to what you guys have been talking about when I got here, I thought that it was the most ludicrous thing in the world. You guys write 4 case studies a year, 4 different case studies with different thematic areas.
And never even repeat them.
Never repeat them, yeah. And then I found myself writing a case study just last summer and being heavily involved. The payoff is huge. That from a faculty side, if we're prepared to go to that effort to see you guys working on a problem. So the first case study I co-wrote was on the Raleigh Children's Hospital, which is the fundraising body for the hospital. That was last summer. To see some of the recommendations getting implemented and boosting revenue for Raleigh was something that was really, really awesome to see, really motivating, I guess.
Yeah.
And I got to see and hang out with a lot of the students who had been in my class or who were potentially going to take my class. So Kelley Connect Week, we work pretty hard, but we also have networking receptions. We have coaching time where not just the seminars, but also having an individual coach where you will work one-on-one with teams every day towards fulfilling that recommendation that can add value to the client. I was also involved in one Agile, the Immersive International experience so far, and I'm involved in another one this summer. So
Where'd your Agile trip go?
the one in January went to India, and the one in June is going to Ireland.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, the Irish one, obviously one that I have great experience on, and we're going to visit a lot of really neat companies within an Irish perspective there. So
That's great.
looking forward to hanging out with.
And
40.
Brooke, you took in a global immersion in India.
I did. I was on the same trip as Will.
Okay, so let's describe that. What did you go through, and how did it help you?
So I chose Agile India. I knew I had space in my schedule and I wanted to do one of the international immersion courses. And so I looked at places that I thought were interesting markets. And working at Walmart, we've just invested in India. And so I knew part of my job, I'd want to know the Indian consumer better and understand the market forces at work there. So I chose India, and enrolling in the class, the first couple sessions that Will conducted, we learned about the background of the country, some of the business models that were in place, some of the cultural forces that weigh in on everyday business decisions. And Ramesh, our dean, went with us to India, so he had amazing business connections, and he allowed us to visit some companies, and we had access to their executives to hear from them. So, and it was great because we had a broad swath of companies to visit. So we saw everything from the GE Research Division, we went to Deloitte Consulting, we saw a startup named Swiggy, we went to an NGO school. So we saw a little bit of everything, and it was wonderful to get that broad experience. I think Ramesh's underlying push was that he wanted to show us that India is more than just a place you can put call centers, and
Right.
we definitely walked away with that experience knowing that there are some real human capital capabilities there that we as a global company could leverage.
How long were you there?
We were there a week in country. I would say as a class we were there a week. I stayed an extra week to poke around, but we were there for a week. We visited several major cities. We saw probably half a dozen companies and got to spend a lot of good time with our classmates.
That's great. And Trip, I know you did the Washington immersion, right?
I did.
So describe that
yeah.
for us.
The Washington class was absolutely amazing. The feedback I gave the team was that it should be required for everyone. I don't think that's going to happen, but we spent a day being lectured by heads that many people would know from CNBC. I met Michael Steele, got to meet with Donna Brazil, and I think the best part about it is with today's political climate, they took a very divisive situation in DC and on the Hill and made it as apolitical as possible. And that doesn't mean that the speakers didn't voice their own personal agendas or the speakers didn't talk about their political views. It meant that almost every time there was a liberal speaker, there was a conservative speaker. And just really seeing that back and forth from what is the RNC going to do with Trump in the office right now and elections coming up? What's the DNC going to do with Trump in the office right now and things coming up? Questions about how did the Democrats lose? How did Hillary lose? What went wrong, right? Having those conversations at the political level was really exciting to see that, like, as much as we think that politicians can't talk, and that conservatives can't talk to liberals. There's a lot of talking going on right now. There's a lot of things that are working about the government that the media just doesn't pick up because that's not going to sell more papers. So that was a really good aspect. I think other than that, the two biggest things that I took away from it were, number one, I should have paid more attention in the Schoolhouse Rock videos. You know, you laugh, but so much of what we do in corporate America is influenced by the policy and regulation set by those two, right? The executive branch and the legislative branch of the government.
Absolutely.
And if you're not involved with public affairs, if you're not aware of what's going on, or even if maybe you don't have the budget for that, maybe you're a small startup firm, how can you get an advocacy group to lobby on your behalf? Why should you get an advocacy group to lobby on your behalf? How can it help you, and how does your corporate strategy need to play in to how those two branches of government are moving forward? The third and final piece was spending a day on Capitol Hill, getting to meet with my congressman, and then sitting in a committee hearing, meeting with, I didn't meet with, but got to listen to the department heads of the ATF and the FBI talk about firearm violence and gun safety. And it was an appropriations committee. So essentially the questions being asked were, do you have enough money to do what you need to do to help this situation? And right after it had been, it took place right after Trump had put out his proposed budget. And so here we have two executive department officials who have to agree with their boss that, yes, whatever my boss said is I'm going to do, but at the same time, of course they want more money. What department doesn't want more money? So hearing that, being able to witness that, got a lecture on the floor of the House, and just really, I think, coming away with a better understanding of how does the government work, why do you care, and what are you going to do about it? I think are the three big takeaways that we got from the Washington campus.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of going online. So obviously the number one advantage is flexibility. But another big advantage, which I'd like both of you to speak to, is the fact that you can literally apply some or more of what you learn in class immediately on the job because you're currently working. Can you give me a good example where something you learned in the virtual classroom you could really employ at work?
Sure, I can give you a live example.
Beautiful.
At Walmart in the corporate strategy team, every time I take a strategy course, there's a piece of it that I have to bring back to work, and I have to say, you know, this is something we could be doing. And so recently, in my current class I'm taking right now, it's a consulting course that teaches about consulting frameworks, and you learn both how the process works from the consulting side and also from the client side. So for me at Walmart, being on the client side, it's helpful to gain that insight into what consultants are thinking and how the frameworks work and what their ultimate mission is. And we're studying the history of consulting as an industry, and we're reading about Boston Consulting, BCG, and how they created this growth matrix framework.
Yes.
And how the axes came about and the evolution of it. And as I was reading about it, they're talking about the pieces of data they used to evolve it. And I thought, I have those. I have all of those pieces of data for my company and all of my business segments, so why can't I build a matrix for us and evolve it in the same way that they did? So I literally took it to work the next morning, and I talked to my team, and I said, what do you guys think about this? And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So we're working on it right now.
Wow. Trip?
So I've got two good examples. One is here at the table. I'll save for last. Right now I'm in a corporate entrepreneurship and innovation class. And I think what we see with the S&P 500 today is that the majority of the firms that are in the S&P 500 today won't be there in 20 years. Right? This is just what history is teaching us over the last 50 years, is that firms are not able to innovate as quickly as they need, and especially with the startups that you see, right? Think about Apple, think about Microsoft, think about what happened with the car manufacturers, right, and how they had to be brought out of bankruptcy. And so as we think about how do we be more innovative, right? What are the structures that we can put in place? What are the changes that we can do culturally to have people actually think about being more innovative at work? And what's the benefit going to be to them? How do you impact change management? How do you actually get to people's emotions and get them to want to change? Because if they don't want to change, they're not going to change, even if they know it's good for them. So that's incredibly impactful, just as we're working through change and what that means, being able to lead part of that strategy around what are we going to do to actually go be more successful in the future. The second piece is while I was taking Will's strategy class.
Perfect segue to you, Will, after this.
Nice.
We had a new vice president come in who was asking us to do different things in different ways than anything we had ever done before. And the engineering team was really struggling with, how do I go do this when I don't really know what you're asking me for and I don't really understand the why behind what you're asking us for. And really, I was able to leverage a lot of the things that I was learning in Will's class to start asking different questions. And the questions I was asking led to that VP turning around and saying, will you come work for me? Because you're asking the questions that nobody else is, and that's what we're missing here. He's a visionary. He's trying to push the vision forward. He needs someone in the middle that can translate that vision into something that the rest of the organization can understand with a strategy around it that would make sense to help drive more profit in the future.
So whatever magic Will taught you, you were able to immediately leverage into a new job and promotion.
Yes, I was.
We don't guarantee that
Yeah, I
outcome, Kelley, but
Will,
it does
I
happen.
don't promise that on
Will, what kind of magic are you teaching in that class?
it's completely student-led, obviously. Trip put a huge amount of time and effort into the class, and it clearly paid off, so yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, a lot of this is the language of business as well as the concepts. Because as you move higher up, there is a language, and it's a more sophisticated language that you need to learn and communicate with than when you're on the low totem pole and you're in entry jobs. And that's an important part of getting an MBA education, right? It's not only to learn the language, it's also to develop self-confidence, which is another thing that a good program does. Do you feel like you're toward the end of the program? Do you feel like you're different in any meaningful way in terms of the level of competence or competence that you have at work?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think beyond technical expertise and knowledge that you obviously gain by just learning about these courses,
Right.
I feel like I've gained a better understanding of how to facilitate discussions and even controversial discussions. So often in class, they'll bring up a topic like a case study, and we'll start diving in, and people have opposing views. And so I think I've learned how to facilitate a discussion and participate in a discussion where not everyone agrees or starts in the same place, and still to get to a conclusion that's universally accepted.
Right.
Yeah, for me, it's not just learning what to say, but also learning what not to say. So for instance, coming from an engineering background, looking at a formula to figure out what the NPV of a project is basic math. And there's a time and a place where you need to talk about the NPV, and there's a time and a place when you absolutely don't. And so it's not just learning what that is and how to apply it and when but it's more of when is it applicable to bring up. For instance, if we make change X to our product, what's that going to do to the NPV? If it's positive, you can say it's positive, right? If it's negative, do you use that? Is that good or is that bad? And what's the situation that you're in? What's going to benefit the firm the most? And really make sure that you're using the information and its applicability appropriately.
Will, are online students different than full-time MBA students?
Yeah, I think they have the different characteristics. Whether that evolves, whether they're absolutely the same day one, and whether that evolution starts to change as they go through the program. Obviously, the residential students spend far more intensive time together, so that cohort model is a little stronger. they share information probably a little better than some of the KD students. So that for me, when I'm dealing with a residential MBA class, all I really have to do is tell one person, oh, well, the assignment is going to be a day later than it ordinarily is. And their institutional knowledge, everything filters around. Whereas with KD students, you will have groups, but there's not necessarily the same sharing that you would have when you live in each other's pockets in the MBA lounge here, for example, on the graduate side. So,
Sure.
yeah, very, very different characteristics, I think.
But then as Tripp and Brooke just described, they're actually applying what they learn.
Oh, yeah.
and they're seeing an immediate result in many cases,
Yeah.
which is a whole other thing, right?
And many of our residential MBA students have experience, but I would say very few of them have the level of experience that our KD students have and the level of autonomy and responsibility. And it's far more, I guess, useful for me to act as a facilitator for the KD students rather than a lecturer. So
Right.
the way in which I can present a class will evolve hugely. For example, when Brooke's in my class and we're talking about corporate strategy, then I can immediately call on Brooke and say, well, Brooke, this framework that we're talking about, do you use it on a daily basis? How do you use it? What insights have you developed as a result of that? And she's immediately sharing, within reason obviously, insights that will benefit the other 25 people in the class. Where in a residential context, not so much. Obviously there has been experience and I can leverage that, but not to the same degree, for sure. So,
Because the age range is quite wide. I mean, 23 to 55 or something.
Yeah.
So you have people with a lot of experience coming in and a lot of experience to share with others, and people with very little experience. So you have a real wide variety of people, much more so than a traditional two-year residential program, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there a lot of learning from your peers in the class and through your team discussions and Connect Weeks?
I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
Thinking through a marketing class, the case we were asked to work on for the entirety of the quarter was essentially how do you bring solar panels, green energy, battery storage, right? Specifically looking at getting batteries in people's homes to harness green energy, and how do you actually bring that to the mass markets, and what's the business case around it? How are you going to present your go-to-market strategy around this? And looking through our team, we had a finance person, we had a ex-Marine, we had the VP of operations, myself, and we're looking at each other like, okay, none of us have any marketing background, which is actually really good because that allows us all to start at the same point. But leveraging each person's experience, right? The Marine was able to talk about procurement, and if we were going to go down the public sector route, and actually are we going to try and like move this in with policy, move this in with regulation, what does that procurement process look like? He had embedded knowledge that we're not sitting there trying to fiddle through procurement manuals.
Right.
Whereas our operations person was able to say, well, what happens if we move operations to the U.S., right? What does that do to our supply chain, right? And look at that business case. So I'd say it was really, really good to have just a very broad expertise there. And because we were all still working, that information doesn't fade, right? Like if I had been in procurement or operations 2 years ago, I may still remember some of that, but if I'm doing it day in and day out, I'm going to have much more vibrant stories to share, and those more vibrant stories, in my opinion, they resound more with me, and so I remember and I really learn more from my peers because they're still working.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think working in the groups, having a diverse perspective is really important, and having people who think differently and approach projects differently, you can observe a lot that way. And I think I'm a firm believer that working in diverse groups ends with a better product.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I always say the dirty little secret, all prospective professors of every good MBA program is all the peer-to-peer learning that goes on. Because in fact, at the end of the day, what you learn from and through your classmates is going to be really the good stuff, the really cool stuff, okay? And a good professor is going to bring that out and going to make that happen, because that's where the magic is. And that's why I like the weekly live sessions, because the more interactive they are and the more that those discussions allow those learnings to come out, the more valuable they are. So if you had to do it over again, would you do it differently?
I would do it differently.
What would you do differently?
I would do another agile program, and I would do it earlier in my career. So earlier in my Kelley career. So I slipped into this weird place, and maybe this happens in online programs, I don't know. But I got into this rhythm of just doing my online classes alone and working in my group projects, over video. And I sort of forgot about the connection points that you can make in Kelley, and they're offered. And I was just sort of skimming over them. I was really focused on my job. I was really focused on my schoolwork, and so I was just cranking it out and sort of forgot that I needed to step back and touch base and diversify my experience.
Yeah.
So going to India, it was like a wake-up call for me, because we were with a group of 20 students, and we're sitting on a bus, and we're put in very uncomfortable situations and new cultures, and being in those experiences with that group of students was an incredible bonding experience, and it reminded me how rich and robust other people's experiences are when they share them with me, and I had really missed that high level of discussion and interaction. I'd forgotten about it almost. So after doing India, I was like, darn it, I wish I could go back and do another one so I could have another touch point there.
Is there a limit to how many agile trips you can do or immersions?
I don't think there's a formal one. I knew someone who'd done 3.
Yeah.
Yeah,
can
with
do
the new
plenty.
curriculum, I think you can do even more. So,
Yeah.
yeah, there's talk about building out even more agiles to satisfy that demand. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And Trip, what about you? Is there something you would do differently?
Well, I wanted to do the Thailand Agile. And
Yes.
I was about to book my plane tickets, and this was right when the soccer players were stuck in the cave, and we were going to Chiang Rai, I'm sorry, I'm saying it incorrectly, and the plane tickets skyrocketed from $800 to thousands of dollars. And if I had been smart, I probably just would have waited another few weeks and bought it when the prices came back down, but that price hike scared me. So that's one. I think the other one is Kelley has a whole lot of services that they offer their students that most of us honestly don't take advantage of. One of those is not just the career counseling, but also our class advisors. And reaching out to them earlier and saying, here are the things I'm interested in. Which classes do you think would be best for me to take? With which professors do you think I'm going to get the most out of? Because like any firm, they have good and bad employees. Any class, they have good and maybe not as good students. And I'm sure, to be real, I think every university has amazing professors like Will here, and some professors who aren't as amazing as Will, and that's just the reality of today. And so reaching out and having those conversations earlier, I think would have been more beneficial than maybe taking 1 or 2 classes, which in hindsight, I'm really glad I took, but I wonder if I couldn't have gotten more out of them if I had just sent a simple email asking for advice.
Yeah, those are 2 really good insights. What about the exams? Taking an exam virtually has got to be a lot different than taking an exam in a traditional class setting. What's it like? I'm sure it differs from class to class, of course, but give it to me from your perspective.
So I've had very few classes that have traditional exams,
Okay.
and I love that because exams don't exist in the real world. Like, I'll never take a test at work. I'll never have to come to a meeting with no notes and regurgitate massive amounts of information. That just doesn't happen. So I think
Right.
tests are impractical measures of knowledge and success. I much prefer when the professors give you a project that you have time to work on, and then you deliver it by a certain point, and that's your final exam of sorts. So I really like when you have a project, whether it's a case study, whether it's developing a solution, whatever it may be, that you can work towards over time, because I think that's much more similar to how the business world really works.
Right, sure.
I agree with everything Brooke said there, because the reality is that no one's going to ask me to go develop a strategy, go work with the team to figure out how to fix a product or go make a new product, and then I deliver it in a paper. Right? It's all presenting it, whether it be to my boss or our executive leadership. But the reality is that there are some classes that have exams. And among those, I'd say that 80% of them are open notes, open book, and then there's the 20% that are don't use anything else. Right? Just use your knowledge. And the point of the exam is to test what we've been able to learn and if we can apply it. And so if I can go to Google and get an answer, then I feel like the exam hasn't been set up correctly. And I think our professors realize this, and they set up the exam as application of the concepts, not just rote memorization and recitation. And so I think that's really why Is it different? Absolutely. I'm sitting at the library, I'm sitting at my desk when the kids are asleep, trying to take an exam, hoping they don't wake up. Um, and that's not the same as being surrounded with other students who are also stressed about taking the exam. But the way that they're structured, I think, facilitates that, you know, even if you wanted to quote unquote cheat, right? Something that at this point in our careers is, I mean, everyone, right, has inklings, but I think like we've moved past that.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. There really is no meaningful way to cheat, just because, I mean, what are you going to get out of it? I can Google a term, but if they're asking me for, right, just recitation of something, then I think they're missing the point. And I don't think I've had a single professor who's asked that. It's all been application of the material.
Right. And will you largely teach through case study, right?
Yes. Yes.
So in traditional case study classrooms, class participation often makes up half the grade. How do you do this online?
Yeah, so that's a great question, actually, and it's something that I've asked a lot of people about before I start to develop syllabi. So for my strategy class, the participation isn't as heavily weighted as it is in a residential class.
Sure.
If you're clearly engaged, if you've read the case study, it's pretty obvious even in the online class. But the bar for these guys, I'm not trying to force them into reading the case study. For most of their motivations, they're here out of their own free will. They want to learn, so it's not some type of course of action that I'm trying to catch them out. I'm trying to facilitate a discussion. And most of the rest of my grade is based on projects, worksheets, and application tasks rather than strict participation. If you do miss my live class, you will have to write up a case summary in lieu of the attendance. So you can still get...
4 pages long.
Yes. Well, if you were
Which only means that you do more work, frankly,
Well,
as well as the students.
Yeah, and as we talked about this morning, the 4 pages is trying to make the equity more or less the same for the people who are showing up for the live class as who are not showing up for the live class. And you can still get 100 points in the case summary, and you can still get 100 points in the participation. So trying to make it fair on the guys who are showing up for class and also fair on the guys who do have some type of conflict. I've had one student through 2 of my classes that I had never seen in my life, but she still got an A in both classes, and I met her in KCW actually a couple of weeks ago, and it was great to actually put a face to all of these assignments that I was reading. So that was pretty special, actually.
And again, if you can't attend a live class, you can always
Absolutely.
grab it out of the archive and see it recorded.
Absolutely. So all of the live classes across all professors that I know are recorded. For me, what I found is most people will probably not watch my recorded class because it doesn't give you an opportunity to participate.
Yeah.
And you can get some of the same benefits from that case write-up that I illustrated. So the other model that I had in one of my other classes, which was a business plan class, was that the live class was predominantly time for you to work in cross-functional groups on your individual business plan.
Right.
So if the 3 of you guys are in a cross-functional group, then John, you're potentially the operations person or have an operations background. Brooke is the marketing person, and Trip is potentially the HR person or whatever. We had 6 different people in groups, and they would allow that.
He's the quant. You
Yeah.
don't want to put him in HR.
Okay, the finance guy, the engineer. Yeah, Trip has a number of different hats that he can wear for sure.
Put him in operations.
So yeah, the live class wasn't the case study in this instance. It was that each person would read the chapter of the business plan from their group mates and would give substantive feedback in those live sessions. So different models, different pedagogies based on different topics that
Sure.
work in varying degrees, yeah.
Now, Will, do you have a preference for teaching? Would you prefer to teach in an online environment, or would you prefer to teach in a traditional classroom?
So that's also a great question. I love a hybrid, I guess.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, now that I've started to teach a lot online, I wouldn't like to exclusively teach in a residential context or exclusively teach in an online context. So I do like a bit of both, I guess. If I was just to get to know these guys in a virtual setting, aside from agiles and KCWs, then it would leave a little something that I would probably miss in the daily interaction. And if I didn't get a chance to meet with these awesome, experienced people through KD, that would also create some type of, as much as it pains me to say, some type of longingness as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And Brooke, do you have a preference, having experienced an undergraduate education that was traditional and a graduate education that was not?
I think both have their merit and value, and
Yeah.
experience-wise, I actually really enjoy the online program. It gives me so much flexibility in terms of how I participate and when I fit it into my life that I think, if looking at it from a whole life point of view,
Yeah.
it's given me a much better work-life social balance to be able to insert, education where it's convenient and not where it's mandated.
Right, sure. And you're at a different stage of your life and your professional career.
Sure, when you're an undergrad,
Yeah.
you can have all the time in the world to go to school and be on campus, and I don't have that luxury anymore.
Yeah, true. Trip?
Agree on the undergrad part. If I could go back and redo my engineering master's, I feel like it could have been more efficient to do it online, honestly.
Huh?
And the reason I say that is because if I have to show up to a lecture to have someone explain to me what I've read in the textbook, then A, the textbook didn't do a good job, right? Or B, I'm just dense, and it's probably a little bit of both. So to me, that's really where the pre-recorded lecture comes in. I can do that my own time once I've read the material, because if I'm late reading the material, why should I go listen to someone talk for an hour about something I'm not going to understand anyway?
Right.
And it's essentially a waste of my hour to then have to go back and reread and then think through everything I had learned. So I honestly wish that the majority of my master's undergrad had been, or my master's engineering had been online, just to allow for that application time in the classroom, not the lecture time in the classroom.
Okay, last question. And I can't believe the time has gone so quickly. What advice would you have to give to your former self when you're going through the process of evaluation and deciding whether or not to go for an online MBA? What advice would you give that person today?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think first of all is if you know what you want to do, how is the MBA going to help you? And if you know what you want to do, there are plenty of resources that you can reach out and ask people, hey, this is what I'm thinking I want to do. Is an MBA right for me? If you don't know what you want to do, maybe you're someone who wants to accelerate their career, maybe you're someone who wants to change careers, maybe you just don't know, you're mixed. You like where you are, but you think there might be more, you just need to get some more experience, I would say do it. If anything, it is a checkbox. I don't think anything about our MBA program has been checking a box, but at the same point, if you're in interview processes and looking at people's credentials, having that checkbox next to your name definitely can't hurt. That said, the MBA program without application of what you're learning, I think, is much less useful than the MBA program with the application. So if you want to check a box but not actually apply it, maybe this isn't right for you. There's another option. Or you can just come and waste your money and get a checkbox, and that's your prerogative as well.
Right.
So I think I would tell myself as I was applying to think about a variety of experiences, because when I chose programs, I wanted to pick things that were very finance-based and very heavy, because I was sure that was my career track.
Yeah.
And find myself, 2 years later on a very different career track. So I've looked at programs and I probably ruled things out or options out that weren't focused on what I thought my path was going to be. So I would have tried to embrace more variety of experience, even in education, knowing that in some form or fashion it'll apply to your career if you let it.
Well, with the new change, neither of which you two are going to experience.
And we are sad about that.
There'll be a lot of deep electives that you could have taken.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you took plenty of electives anyway, but a doubling of the elective offerings as a result of the new curriculum. Will, do you have advice for someone out there who's in the consideration phase?
Similar, I guess, to piggyback on what the two guys said, to take advantage of everything that Kelley offers. One of the things, I guess, that is a little sad for me is to find a student who's gone through the process and hasn't fully taken advantage of the career center, or hasn't made time to talk to their faculty, or to do an agile, or to really immerse themselves in a Kelley Connect Week. Taking it as far as you can, because faculty want to help you, your peers want to help you, every support function in Kelley wants to help you. So being able to leverage it to that value that really is impactful is something that I would recommend.
Great, good advice. Will, thank you. Trip, Brooke, it's a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for your insights. Now you really know what it's like to go and get an online MBA. Or at least you should if you've been watching this episode, which is the second episode of 3 parts on the MBA online experience. This is John Byrne with Poets and Quants on the campus of the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. Thanks for watching.